The hem of the dress caught on a splintered hanger, yanking Maria back into the thrift store's musty embrace just as she turned to leave. She stumbled, the fabric whispering against her skin like a ghost's apology, and in that split second the world tilted, revealing a crumpled slip of paper tucked into the lace bodice, yellowed with time and regret. "I still love you," it read in ink that bled like an open wound, and Maria's breath hitched, the words slicing through the humid Texas air as if Juliet had just spoken them from the shadows of her own unraveling life. She clutched the note, her knuckles whitening against the thrift store's fluorescent hum, the scent of mothballs and forgotten dreams clinging to her like the weight of Monroe's watchful eyes. Monroe, Texas, that sun-baked speck on the map where the Rio Grande's whisper met the endless flatlands, where cotton fields stretched like accusations under a sky too vast for secrets. Maria had come here as a girl, fleeing the clamor of El Paso with her mother after her father vanished into the border haze, chasing dreams that dissolved like salt in the wind. Now at 32, she was the high school English teacher who quoted Whitman to bored teens, the one who baked tamales for the church bake sale and smiled through the whispers about her unmarried state. But today, on this sweltering afternoon in late summer, the dress had found her, or perhaps she had found it. Ivory silk with pearl buttons that gleamed like distant stars, a relic from some other woman's shattered vows. Maria's fingers traced the note's edges, the handwriting a familiar curl that twisted her gut. Juliet. It had to be. No one else wrote her name like that, with the loop on them that dipped low, as if burdened by the very secrets it confessed. She slipped the paper into her pocket, the dress draped over her arm like a confession she wasn't ready to wear. The thrift store clerk, an elderly woman named Etta with hair like spun sugar and eyes that missed nothing, glanced up from her ledger. "That one's got stories, honey," Etta said, her voice a drawl thick as molasses. "Belonged to a girl who ran off before the I-do's. Left it here with a prayer and a curse." Maria forced a laugh, the sound brittle in her throat, and paid the $5 with shaking hands. Outside, the heat pressed down like a judgment, the gravel lot empty save for her faded blue pickup, its bed lined with lesson plans and a cooler of iced tea for the drive back to her rented shotgun house on Elm Street. She hung the dress in the cab, the fabric swaying gently as she drove, and with every mile the note burned hotter against her thigh. Juliet Hargrove, the golden girl of Monroe, heir to the Hargrove cotton empire, with summers in Savannah and winters dodging the family's expectations like rain in a drought. They'd met at the county fair when Maria was 20, Juliet 19, both of them stealing cotton candy under the Ferris wheel's glow, laughing until the world blurred. But that was then. Now Maria was weeks from marrying Daniel Reyes, the steady handyman from her church youth group, the man whose callous palms promised stability in a town that devoured the unsteady. Daniel, with his easy smile and sermons on Proverbs, represented the life Maria had scripted for herself. A house with a picket fence, children who wouldn't know the sting of difference, a seat at the family table where her mother's rosary beads clicked approval. It was safe. It was right. Or so the preacher said every Sunday, his voice booming over the congregation like thunder over the plains. She pulled into her driveway, the dress bundled under her arm, and stepped inside to the cool dimness of her living room, where ceiling fans stirred the air like lazy ghosts. Her mother, Rosa, was in the kitchen, chopping onions for enchiladas, the radio crooning old Patsy Cline tunes. "Mija, you're late," Rosa said without looking up, her knife a rhythmic accusation. "Daniel called. Said he'd fix the porch light tomorrow. Good man, that one." Maria nodded, draping the dress over the couch, the note still hidden. "Found this today," she murmured, her voice threading through the sizzle of oil in the pan. Rosa wiped her hands on her apron, eyes narrowing at the ivory folds. "A wedding dress? From where?" "Thrift store." Maria's words hung there, simple as dust motes, but Rosa's face tightened, the lines around her mouth deepening like cracks in parched earth. In Monroe, thrift was survival for folks like them. Mexican-American families scraping by on service jobs while the Hargroves owned the horizon. But a wedding dress? That was tempting fate, borrowing joy from someone else's ruin. "You shouldn't," Rosa said finally, turning back to the stove. "Brings bad luck. Wear something new, something blessed." Her voice carried the weight of old-world fears, the ones that crossed borders with her. The evil eye, the whispers of brujas, the unyielding grip of La Familia. Maria wanted to argue, to spill the note's secret like spilled salt, but instead she carried the dress to her bedroom, laying it across the quilt her abuela had stitched from flour sacks. Alone, she unfolded the paper again, the words blurring through unshed tears. I still love you, Maria. Forgive me. G. Forgive her for what? For the summer nights tangled in Juliet's attic, the air thick with magnolia and whispered promises? For the way Juliet's laughter had chased away the loneliness that clung to Maria like river mud? Or for the autumn when Juliet's father found the letters, tucked in a Bible of all places, and the world came crashing down? Maria sank onto the bed, the mattress creaking under her, and let the memories flood in unbidden as monsoon rain. It started innocently enough, that fairground spark. Juliet, with her sun-streaked hair and dresses that fluttered like flags of rebellion, had bumped into Maria at the ring toss booth, spilling a fistful of tickets into the dirt. Oh shoot, she drawled, that southern lilt wrapping around Maria like kudzu. Guess you'll have to help me win him back. They'd spent the night trading stories under the Midway lights, Juliet confessing her dread of debutante balls and Daddy's plans for Vanderbilt, Maria sharing tales of her mother's border-crossing grit, and the poetry she scribbled in stolen notebooks. By dawn, as the rides dismantled in the gray light, Juliet had pressed a wildflower into Maria's palm. Don't let this town bury you, she'd said, her fingers lingering. What followed was a season of stolen hours, drives in Juliet's convertible along the backroads to the old pecan orchards, where the leaves rustled secrets and the radio played Joan Baez's ballads that made Maria's heart ache with possibility. They'd park under the stars, Juliet's head on Maria's shoulder, talking of escaping to Oregon, where the rains washed away judgments and the forests hid lovers like them. We could have a life, Juliet would murmur, her breath warm against Maria's neck. Books and coffee shops, no one knowing our names. But Monroe knew. It always did. The town was a web of porches and prayer circles, where gossip traveled faster than floodwaters. Whispers started when Juliet skipped the cotillion mixer to study, when Maria's truck was spotted too often near the Hargrove estate. And then came the letters, dozens, hidden in hollowed-out hymnals and glove compartments, words that burned brighter than any sermon. One night, in the attic of Juliet's family home, a sprawling Victorian on the edge of town, with gables like watchful eyes, they'd crossed the line from words to touch. The air was heavy with attic dust, and the scent of Juliet's lavender soap, the floorboards groaning under their weight as they explored each other with the tentative hunger of the forbidden. Maria remembered the silk of Juliet's skin, the way her size mapped constellations on the rafters, the world narrowing to the space between their breaths. This is us, Juliet had whispered afterward, tracing Maria's collarbone. No one else. Yet someone else always intruded. Mr. Hargrove, with his Bible-thumping righteousness and cotton-stained fortune, had hired a private eye after the maid found a lipstick-smeared note in Juliet's laundry. The confrontation came like a storm. Yelling that echoed through the house, Juliet's sobs muffled behind locked doors. By morning she was gone, shipped off to a finishing school in Virginia, her letters ceasing like a radio signal lost to static. Maria had shattered then, alone in her room with the wildflower pressed flat in a book of sonnets. Months blurred into a numb routine, teaching Dickinson to kids who doodled instead of dreaming, nodding through her mother's matchmaking schemes. Daniel had appeared like a bomb, kind, unassuming, the son of the church deacon, with a proposal that felt like surrender wrapped in a ring. I want to build something real with you, he'd said on one knee in the park, and Maria had said yes because what else was there? Juliet was a ghost, Monroe's judgment a chain. Now the note resurrected her. Maria slipped the dress from its hanger, the silk cool against her skin as she held it to the mirror. It fit like a memory. Loose at the waist, tight across the shoulders, the lace whispering of what-ifs. She imagined Juliet wearing it once, perhaps in a fever dream of rebellion, before folding it away with this final plea. Tears came then, hot and unbidden, soaking the bodice as Maria sank to the floor. How could Juliet still love her, after the silence, after the years? And how could Maria stand at an altar tomorrow, vowing forever to a man whose touch stirred nothing but duty? The phone rang, shattering the quiet. Daniel, his voice warmed through the line. Can't wait for the fitting tomorrow, darlin'. Mama's baking your favorite pie. Maria murmured agreements, her throat tight, and hung up to the sound of Rose's footsteps in the hall. "Everything all right, Mija?" her mother called, pausing at the door. "Fine, Mama." Lies came easier now, woven into the fabric of her days. But as night fell, the dress laid out like a challenge. Maria felt the first crack in her resolve. The note wasn't just words. It was a key, turning in the lock of a door she'd bolted shut. And in the small hours with crickets chorusing outside, she began to wonder if freedom tasted like regret, or like the wild, untamed wind of Juliet's laugh. Dawn broke over Monroe like a reluctant confession, painting the sky in streaks of rose and gold that seeped through Maria's curtains. She woke tangled in sheets, the dress still draped across the chair like a sentinel, the note pinned beneath her pillow as if to guard her dreams. Sleep had been a battlefield, visions of Juliet's attic, the press of bodies and promises, warring with the sterile white of a church aisle, Daniel's hand in hers. Her alarm buzzed, pulling her into the day, but the words "I still love you" echoed in her veins like a pulse she couldn't quiet. She dressed for school in a simple blouse and skirt, the kind that blended into the sea of khaki and plaid in Monroe High's hallways. The drive was a blur of flatlands and faded billboards advertising Jesus Saves and local diners, the radio tuned low to avoid the morning gospel hour. Parking under the live oaks that shaded the lot, Maria gathered her books, The Great Gatsby, with its tales of green lights and unreachable shores, and stepped into the fray of teenage chaos. Her classroom was a sanctuary of sorts, third-period English, where she could lose herself in Fitzgerald's longing and pretend her own heart wasn't a divided map. But today the words blurred on the page. As she lectured on Daisy's illusions, her voice caught on the line about loving two people at once, and a girl in the back row, Lila, sharp-eyed and out as the town's only rainbow flag, tilted her head. "Miss Maria, you think Gatsby got it right? Chasing what you can't have." The class snickered, but Lila's gaze held steady, a mirror to Maria's hidden fractures. "Or maybe," Maria replied, her throat dry, "it's about recognizing what you already hold." The bell rang, mercifully, and the room emptied, leaving her alone with chalk dust and the ghost of that question. She lingered, erasing the board with mechanical strokes, until Principal Harlan poked his head in, a bear of a man with a mustache like a broom and eyes that scanned for infractions. "Rhea's wedding's the talk of the town," he boomed, clapping her shoulder. "Whole school's chipping in for a shower. Daniel's one lucky fella." Maria smiled, the expression automatic as breathing, and murmured thanks. Harlan meant well in his gruff way, but his words landed like stones in still water, rippling reminders of the cage she was stepping into. Lunch was a hasty sandwich in the teacher's lounge, where gossip swirled around her like smoke, the Hargrove Mill closing another shift, layoffs hitting the east side hard. Whispers of Juliet's return spotted at the diner after years away. Maria's fork paused midair, her appetite fleeing. Juliet back in Monroe? The town thrived on such rumors, twisting truths into tall tales, but this one lodged in her chest like a thorn. Afternoon classes dragged, the heat building until the AC wheezed surrender. By dismissal, Maria's head throbbed, the note a talisman in her pocket. She detoured to the library on impulse, the cool hush of shelves a balm, seeking solace in the worn spines of Austen and Woolf. But there, in the biography section, fate or cruelty intervened. A book on Southern Gothic writers lay open, and tucked inside was a library card stamped with Juliet's name, dated last week. Maria's fingers trembled as she traced the elegant script, the same as the notes. Juliet was here, breathing the same stifled air, unraveling the same threads. She drove home faster than she should, gravel spitting under her tires, the dress waiting like an accusation. Rosa was at the market, the house empty save for the tick of the grandfather clock her father had left behind. Maria spread the note on the kitchen table, studying it under the harsh light. The paper's creases, the faint watermark of a tear. Forgive me. For leaving. For the silence. Or for loving her still, in a world that branded such love as sin? The front door creaked open hours later, Daniel's voice calling her name. He stepped in with a toolbox and a grin, sweat beading on his brow from the porch repair. "Brought burgers from the grill," he said, setting the bag down, his eyes lighting on the dress. "That's the one? Looks fancy." Maria nodded, folding the note away. Found it cheap. Feels right. They ate on the porch swing, the evening air cooling as cicadas tuned up their symphony. Daniel talked of the honeymoon cabin he'd booked near the hill country, of starting a family with kids who knew the Lord young. His words were kind, earnest, a blueprint for the life Monroe approved. But as he leaned in for a kiss, chaste and obligatory, Maria's mind wandered to Juliet's attic, the fire that had scorched her soul. That night, sleep evaded her again. She rose at midnight, slipping into the backyard where the mesquite trees whispered in the breeze. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent witnesses, and Maria clutched the note, whispering back to the dark. What do you want from me now? No answer came, only the distant howl of a coyote, echoing her isolation. The next morning brought the bridal shower, a cluster of women in the church basement. Rosa beaming, aunts clucking over lace doilies, Lila's mother pressing a quilt into her hands. Gifts piled high. Toasters, linens, a Bible with their names embroidered in gold. Maria played the part, laughing at the right moments, but her eyes strayed to the window, scanning the street for a flash of sun-streaked hair. Juliet. The rumor gnawed at her, a promise or a peril. By afternoon, the heat peaked and Maria escaped to the riverbank, the one spot where the Brazos curved lazy and forgiving. She spread the dress on the grass, lying beside it, the fabric a proxy for the body she craved. Memories resurfaced unbidden. Juliet teaching her to drive stick in the pecan grove, gears grinding like their laughter, stolen dances in abandoned barns, hips swaying to phantom fiddles, the first kiss under a harvest moon, tasting of cider and courage. But woven through the joy were the shadows, the furtive glances at gas stations, the coded texts that could unravel everything. Juliet's family, old money laced with old hatreds, had made it clear. Deviation from the script meant disinheritance, exile. You're my everything, Juliet had sobbed that last night, before the car pulled away. But they own me. Maria sat up, the dress pooling in her lap, and felt the anger rise. Not at Juliet, but at the town, the traditions that choked like vines. Monroe wasn't just land. It was a covenant binding daughters to duty, silencing desires that didn't fit the frame. Her own family, with Rosa's whispered prayers against the devil's temptations, had never guessed, but the fear lingered, a specter in every embrace. As the sun dipped, painting the water gold, Maria made a vow to the river. She'd burn the note, bury the dress, walk the aisle with Daniel. Stability over storm. But deep down in the marrow of her bones, she knew the lie was cracking and Juliet's return, if true, would shatter it wide. Word of Juliet's homecoming spread like wildfire through Monroe's veins, igniting conversations in diners and pews alike. By week's end it was fact. She'd come back from Atlanta where she'd tried her hand at design, to nurse her ailing mother through chemo. The Hargrove matriarch, once the queen of garden clubs, now frail in hospice care, had summoned her only daughter home. Whispers painted Juliet as reformed, engaged to a banker from Dallas, ready to settle into the family fold. Maria heard it all in fragments, from Harlan at school, from Rosa over coffee, from the cashier at the Piggly Wiggly who bagged her milk with a knowing nod. Each rumor was a needle, pricking the fragile skin of Maria's resolve. She avoided the Hargrove estate, that white-columned sentinel on the hill, but her route to school skirted its gates, and once, twice, she slowed, glimpsing figures on the veranda. Not Juliet, just shadows, but enough to stir the pot of her unrest. Daniel noticed her distraction, chalking it to bridal nerves. "You're glowing though," he said one evening, twirling her in the kitchen to an imaginary waltz. "Like you were made for this." Made for this. The words echoed as Maria lay awake, the dress hidden in her closet now, the note folded into her journal amid scribbled poems of fractured light. She wrote by flashlight some nights, verses that bled of locks and liberations, words she'd never share. Teaching became her anchor, dissecting their eyes were watching God with her seniors, Janie's rebellion a vicarious thrill. "Love isn't a cage," she told them, voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Lila lingered after class one day, her backpack slung low. "You sound like you know, Miss M. Like you've been there." Maria met her eyes, seeing the girl's quiet courage, the flag pin on her collar, the girlfriend waiting by the bike racks. "We all have our Hurston moments," she said softly. The trick is finding the pear tree. Lila smiled, a spark of solidarity, and left Maria with a weight lifted, if only a fraction. But the fraction grew heavier at the rehearsal dinner, held in the church hall under strings of white lights that mimicked stars Monroe rarely allowed. Family and friends gathered, Ray's kin in pressed shirts, Rose's sisters with rosaries clutched like shields. Daniel's toast was heartfelt, pledging a life of faith and fortitude. And the room toasted back, glasses clinking like chains. Maria stood beside him, her smile a mask, until the door swung open late in the evening, admitting a late guest, Juliet. She entered like a specter in silk, hair pulled back, a diamond on her finger that caught the light like a warning. The room hushed, then buzzed as she made her way to the Hargrove table, empty save for her father's stern nod. No banker in sight, just Juliet, thinner than Maria remembered, eyes shadowed but sharp. Their gazes locked across the crowd, a current that hummed through the chatter, invisible but electric. Juliet's lips parted, a ghost of a smile before she looked away, accepting a plate with murmured thanks. Maria's heart thundered, the note's words a roar in her ears. She excused herself to the powder room, splashing water on her face, the mirror reflecting a woman on the precipice, cheeks flushed, eyes alive with terror and triumph. When she returned, Juliet was gone, slipped out like smoke, but the air lingered with her perfume, lavender and regret. That night, in the quiet of her room, Daniel having driven home to his mother's for tradition's sake, Maria pulled the dress from hiding. She slipped it on, the silk molding to her like a second skin, and stood before the full-length mirror her mother had gifted. It was perfect, achingly so, the lace a lattice of what might have been. Tears traced paths down her cheeks as she unpinned her hair, imagining Juliet's fingers there instead of Daniel's vows. A knock shattered the reverie, Rosa in her nightgown, eyes wide at the sight. "Mija, what are you doing? It's bad luck to wear it alone." But her voice cracked, seeing the rawness in Maria's face. They sat on the bed then, mother and daughter, the dress between them like a confessor. Rosa's hand found hers, rough from years of labor. "Tell me," she whispered. "Whatever it is, tell me." The words tumbled out in a rush. The thrift store, the note, Juliet's ghost. Rosa listened, her face a map of sorrow and surprise, the rosary forgotten in her lap. "Ay Dios," she breathed when Maria finished. "Love like that. It's a cross, not a crown. But hiding it? That eats the soul." For the first time Maria felt seen, not judged but held. Rosa pulled her close, murmuring prayers in Spanish, and in that embrace, the walls of Monroe seemed to thin, just a breath away from crumbling. The wedding dawn arrived cloaked in fog, the brasses shrouded as if the river itself mourned. Maria rose early, the dress laid out like a battlefield flag, Daniel's ring box on the dresser a sentinel of duty. Rosa brewed coffee strong as resolve, her eyes red-rimmed from a night of vigil. "Whatever you choose today," she said, pressing a cup into Maria's hands, "choose with your heart open. La Virgin understands." Church bells tolled as guests arrived, the parking lot filling with sedans and trucks adorned with tin cans and just married signs. Maria dressed in the bride's room, fingers fumbling with buttons, the mirror reflecting a stranger in white, beautiful broken. Lila slipped in with a corsage, her grin fierce. "You look like a queen," she said, pinning it. "Remember the pear tree." The organ swelled and Maria walked the aisle on Rosa's arm. The pews a blur of faces. Harlan beaming, Etta dabbing tears, Daniel at the altar in his tux, eyes shining with uncomplicated joy. Vows hovered on the priest's lips when the doors banged open. Juliet bursting in like a tempest, dress torn at the hem, face streaked with desperation. "Stop!" she cried, voice cutting through the hush like a blade. "Maria, please." The congregation gasped, a ripple of shock, but Maria froze, the world narrowing to Juliet's eyes, pleading, unyielding. Daniel turned, confusion etching his brow, as Juliet advanced, the diamond gone from her finger, replaced by the rawness of truth. "I couldn't let you do this," Juliet said, halting feet from the altar, her breath ragged. "Not to her. Not to us." Whispers erupted, sin, scandal, but Maria stepped forward, the bouquet falling from numb fingers. "Juliet," she whispered, the name a prayer and a plea. The priest cleared his throat, But Juliet pressed on, pulling the crumpled note from her pocket, the twin to Maria's, ink fresh. I wrote it last week when I heard about the wedding. Slipped it into the dress at Edda's, hoping you'd find it. Her voice broke, tears carving paths. I ran from Atlanta, from the banker, from everything. Because I never stopped. And if you marry him, it'll kill me. But it'll kill you more. Daniel's face paled, the pieces falling into place. Maria, he said, voice small. The room held its breath, Monroe's judgment a palpable weight, but in that moment Maria saw it all. The cage of expectations, the chains of class and creed, the love that had survived in silence. She turned to Daniel, hand extended, the ring a cold circle. I'm sorry, she said, voice steady for the first time in years. You're good, Daniel. But this isn't me. He nodded, slow, pain flickering before resolve settled. Go find your truth, he murmured, slipping the ring free. Chaos followed. Guests murmuring, Rosa rising with quiet dignity, Lila whooping from the back. But Maria took Juliet's hand, the silk of the dress brushing against denim, and they walked out into the fog, bells tolling not for union but release. The town would talk for years, branding them outcasts, but as the river mist cleared to reveal the sun, Maria felt the first breath of freedom, sharp and sweet. In the aftermath, Monroe didn't shatter. It calcified, opinions hardening like clay in the kiln of Sunday sermons. The wedding that wasn't became legend, whispered in beauty parlors and barbershops, a cautionary tale of temptation and folly. Maria and Juliet fled to the river house Juliet's mother had willed her, a sagging cottage on the Brazos Bend, far enough from prying eyes but tethered by memory. There, amid peeling wallpaper and the river's ceaseless murmur, they unpacked not just boxes but burdens. The dress hung in the bedroom like a talisman of turning. The first days were a fragile truce with the world. Rosa visited with tamales and tentative forgiveness, her embrace for Juliet polite but warming, like coffee left too long on the stove. Love is love, she said one evening, watching them sway on the porch to a scratchy record of Billie Holiday. But the town, they'll test you. Daniel sent a note through Rosa, simple, gracious. Wishing you both the green light. It arrived with wildflowers, a nod to Gatsby, and Maria wept for the man she'd nearly chained herself to, grateful for his grace in her graceless flight. Juliet's revelations came in layers, peeled back over lazy mornings with chicory coffee and afternoons mending the cottage's screens. Atlanta had been exile disguised as opportunity. A design firm where she'd sketched bridal gowns laced with rebellion, hidden messages in hems for women like them. The banker was a prop, a shield against her father's ultimatums, but seeing Maria's engagement photo in the Monroe Gazette had cracked the facade. I drove all night, Juliet confessed one dusk, her head on Maria's lap as fireflies danced. The note was my Hail Mary. Maria traced the scar on Juliet's palm, from a childhood fall in the cotton fields, and shared her own silences, the poems she'd burned, the nights she'd prayed to saints who never answered. Their reconnection was tentative at first, touches lingering like questions, but soon the attic memories reignited, bodies remembering what words couldn't capture. In the cottage's feather bed, with the river lapping lullabies, they wove new promises, not vows before witnesses, but oaths in the dark, fierce and freeing. Yet freedom had teeth. The Hargrove machine ground on. Mr. Hargrove cut Juliet off, the estate's lights dimming as if in mourning, his lawyers circling with threats of contests over the river house. Whispers reached them via Lila, now a fierce ally, texting from school. Your ex-boss asked about you. Said you're unfit now. Harlan had called Maria, voice gruff with regret, offering unpaid leave to sort your situation. She resigned instead, the letter typed on yellowed paper, citing a need for new horizons. Work became reinvention. Juliet's sketches turned to custom pieces. Dresses for dreamers, sold online to women escaping their own Monroes. Maria started a writing circle at the community center, a ragtag group of locals. Lila and her girlfriend, a queer teen from the res, even Etta with her thrift store tales. They met under the oaks, sharing stories that defied the town's script, voices rising like smoke signals. But betrayal lurked in the shadows. It came via a letter from Juliet's cousin Amelia, once a childhood confidant, now a viper in debutante silk. She'd found old photos, attic snapshots blurred but damning, and sent copies to the Gazette with a note. Expose the sinners, save the family name. The story broke mid-autumn front page. Hargrove heiress's scandalous return. A town's broken heart. Photos splashed across the spread. Maria's face pixelated but recognizable. Headlines dripping venom. The backlash was swift. Rocks through the cottage windows, Bible verses scrawled on the door. Abomination. Rose's phone rang with anonymous calls. Her job at the school cafeteria threatened. Lila's parents pulled her from the writing group, fear outweighing pride. Juliet spiraled, sketches tearing under frantic hands. Her mother's hospice bed a distant anchor pulling her back to duty. Maybe we were wrong, she whispered one night, rain hammering the tin roof. Maybe Monroe wins. Maria held her through the sobs, the betrayal a fresh wound, but anger forged resolve. They want a villain, she said, voice steel. Let them have one. She rallied the circle, now underground, meeting in Lila's garage, and penned a response, not to the paper but to the ether. An op-ed emailed to Austin blogs, raw with their story. We are Monroe's daughters, it began. And our love is no crime. It went viral in queer circuits. Shares rippling from Portland to Provincetown, drawing letters of solidarity that piled like ballast. The high tide of conflict crested at the town hall meeting, called to discuss moral decay, in the wake of the article. Mr. Hargrove presided, his face thunder, railing against deviance eroding our values. Maria and Juliet attended, hands clasped under the table, the room packed with familiar faces, Harlan fidgeting, Etta in the front row, Rosa absent but her rosary a silent prayer in Maria's pocket. When the floor opened, Juliet rose first, voice steady as the river. This town raised me, she said. Taught me grace and grit. But it also taught me shame for loving as I do. No more. Applause sputtered, mixed with jeers, but Maria followed, her words a quiet storm. I've taught your children to dream beyond these borders, to question the cages we build. Juliet and I aren't the fracture. We're the light through it. Lila stood then Etta, voices joining in a chorus that drowned the dissent. Hargrove's gavel fell, but the tide had turned, cracks forming in the old guard. In the weeks that followed, small victories bloomed. The Gazette retracted, Amelia shunned by her own, Daniel starting a support group for misfit marriages. Juliet's mother passed peacefully, her last words a benediction. Be free, Nina. The cottage became a haven, walls repainted in bold hues, the dress remade into curtains that billowed like wings. Yet the scars lingered, a map of where they'd bled. Maria woke some nights to Juliet's murmurs, ghosts of doubt, and they'd walk the riverbank, stones skipping into the dark. We survived, Maria would say, and Juliet would smile, the old fire kindling. We're thriving. Winter settled on Monroe like a heavy quilt, frosting the cotton fields in silver and muting the town's clamor to a hush. The cottage by the Brazos became an island in the frost, its chimney puffing wood smoke signals of endurance. Maria and Juliet marked time there, seasons turning from betrayal's blaze to a quieter forge, where love tempered into something resilient, less fragile than before. The writing circle grew, spilling from garages to the library after Etta's advocacy won them a room. Stories read by lantern light, voices weaving a new tapestry for Monroe's daughters. But peace was a jealous guardian, warded off by old specters. Mr. Hargrove's health faltered, a stroke felling the Cotton King in his study, leaving Juliet sole heir to a crumbling empire. The lawyers descended like vultures, contesting the will with claims of undue influence from her lifestyle. Amelia resurfaced, testifying in depositions with honeyed lies, painting Juliet as manipulated, Maria as the serpent in the garden. Court dates loomed in Austin, a 3-hour drive through hill country that twisted Maria's gut with every mile. They prepared in stolen moments. Juliet poring over ledgers by the fire, Maria drafting affidavits with Lila's help. Now a paralegal intern, fierce as ever. Nights blurred into strategy sessions, the bed cold with distance, until exhaustion pulled them close. This isn't just land, Juliet murmured one dawn, snow dusting the windows. It's him trying to bury me one last time. Maria kissed her temple, tasting salt. Then we'll dig you out. The trial opened in a sterile courtroom, fluorescent lights buzzing like judgments. Hargrove's kin filled the benches, faces pinched with propriety, while their allies, Rosa, Daniel, even Harlan, sat sentinel. The judge, a silver-haired woman from San Antonio with a no-nonsense drawl, eyed the proceedings with veiled curiosity. Amelia took the stand first, her testimony a venomous weave, Juliet's wild phase, the attic indiscretions, Maria as outsider corrupting the bloodline. Family honor demands restitution, she concluded, eyes gleaming. Juliet's turn came midweek, her voice a river steady carving truth from stone. She spoke of the estate not as fortune but as chains, of her father's rages masked as righteousness, the way he'd bartered her future for stock shares. He loved me in his way, she said, meeting his empty chair's ghost. But love doesn't own. Maria watched from the gallery, heart swelling with pride and terror, the dress's lace, now a scarf around Juliet's neck, a talisman against the fray. Cross-examinations dragged, lawyers probing wounds, but then came the witnesses. Etta recounting the thrift store donation, the dress left with love's last word. Rosa, her accent thick with emotion, testifying to Juliet's kindness in nursing her mother, a daughter in every way. Daniel's words landed soft but sure. Honor isn't blood or bank, it's choosing right over rote. The jury, a cross-section of Texas, farmers, teachers, a queer mechanic from the suburbs, listened, faces unreadable. Adjournment brought limbo. The drive home silence save for the radio's murmur of civil rights marches in distant cities. They stopped at a roadside diner, neon flickering, open 24. And over greasy eggs Juliet broke. "What if we lose it all?" she whispered, fork trembling. Maria covered her hand. "We have the cottage, the river, us." But doubt gnawed, a bitter undercurrent. The verdict came on a sleet-lashed morning, the courtroom packed tighter than a harvest barn. The foreman, a wiry woman with calloused hands, read the ruling. Estate upheld, contests dismissed, with a terse note on irrelevance of personal relations to testamentary intent. Cheers erupted from their side, hugs exchanged amid tears, but victory tasted bittersweet. Amelia stormed out, disgraced, her schemes unraveled like cheap thread. Back in Monroe, the thaw brought green shoots, cotton bolls budding, the writing circle publishing a chapbook of tales, sales funding a scholarship for out kids. Juliet sold parcels of the estate to ethical buyers, preserving wetlands, turning profit to purpose. Maria took a job at the community college, teaching creative writing to adults hungry for voice. Their life wove domestic rhythms. Suppers of gumbo and gorditas, evenings sketching designs or reading aloud from Mrs. Dalloway, bodies entwined in the quiet certainty of chosen home. Yet the human cost lingered. Juliet's nightmares returned, father's voice thundering accusations, and Maria held her through them, whispering litanies of worth. Rosa's health wavered, arthritis flaring in the damp, and they drove her to specialists in Austin, the three of them a makeshift family, bonds forged in fire. Spring swelled into summer, the river running high with melt, and they marked their first anniversary, not of flight but of finding, with a picnic under the pecan trees. Juliet presented a ring, simple gold with an inscribed wildflower, and Maria slipped it on, vows renewed in the shade. To horizons, Juliet toasted with river water in tin cups, and the loves that lead us there. But fate, ever the dramatist, scripted one final twist. A letter arrived from Savannah, Juliet's aunt, Amelia's mother, extending an olive branch. An apology, a bequest of family heirlooms, a plea for reconciliation. "Blood thins without forgiveness," it read. Juliet burned it in the hearth, ashes scattering to the wind, but Maria saw the flicker of longing, the scar of severed roots. "Forgive but don't forget," Maria counseled, and they wrote back. Not capitulation but boundaries, visits on their terms, no sermons. The aunt arrived in autumn, tentative in pearls, and over tea on the porch, bridges mended tentatively, a fragile peace. Through it all, Monroe softened at the edges. The Gazette ran a feature on the writing circle, Lila's art on the walls. Daniel remarried, a quiet ceremony they attended. His bride a painter with eyes like Juliet's fire. Etta passed the thrift store torch to Lila, dresses donated with notes of hope. Maria and Juliet's love deepened, Not in grand gestures but in the daily grace of endurance. Hands clasped over lesson plans, laughter echoing in the kitchen. The dress, remade into a quilt, warmed their bed, threads of past and present stitched seamless. In quiet moments Maria would trace the note's words, faded now, and marvel at the arc. From thrift store hook to this hearthside haven. Love, she learned, wasn't absence of storm but dancing in it, human and whole. The second anniversary found them on the road, fleeing Monroe's swelter for Oregon's mist-shrouded coast. Juliet's designs had caught a Portland boutique's eye gowns with hidden pockets for love notes, lace veils etched with escape maps, and the trip was part scouting, part sabbatical from the town's lingering gaze. They drove Juliet's old convertible, top down despite the chill, wind whipping secrets from their hair as the plains gave way to pines. Portland greeted them with rain-slick streets and coffee shops alive with flannel and folk tunes. A world where hands held without whisper. They wandered Powell's city of books, fingers trailing spines, Juliet pausing at a volume of Southern poetry. Walt would approve, she said, quoting lines of self-reliance that mirrored their path. Maria smiled, buying it for bedtime readings, the pages a bridge between old wounds and new blooms. The boutique meeting went better than scripted. The owner, a non-binary artist named Riley, saw in Juliet's work a kindred rebellion. "These aren't just dresses," Riley said, fingering a bodice with concealed affirmations. "They're armor." A contract followed, small runs, online sales, and Juliet's eyes lit with a fire Maria hadn't seen since the attic days. That night, in a loft hotel overlooking the Willamette, they celebrated with takeout pho and slow dances to Nina Simone, bodies swaying in the glow of city lights that judged no one. But reinvention carried echoes. Back home, the orders poured in, shipping from the cottage turned studio, but Monroe's undercurrent stirred. A new preacher arrived, firebrand from the Panhandle, sermons lashing the lavender lobby, invading their flock. Protests flickered at the community center, pickets with signs, "Repent or perish." Lila's girlfriend faced slurs at the diner, and the writing circle shrank, fear chasing away the timid. Maria felt the pull of protection, urging Juliet to focus on Portland, but Juliet resisted, roots too deep. "We don't run again," she said, nailing a rainbow flag to the porch. "We stand." Their solidarity drew allies. Daniel's group expanded, Harlan retired with a quiet endorsement, even Mr. Hargrove's old foreman offering mill space for workshops. Autumn brought awakening. A town festival, the Harvest Moon Hoedown, where old rhythms met new. Maria and Juliet attended, not as pariahs but participants, Juliet in a skirt of her own design, Maria with Rosa on her arm. The dance floor pulsed with fiddles and feet, and when a slow waltz spun up, they stepped out, hands linked, the crowd parting then joining, a hesitant embrace. Not all bent. The preacher cornered them by the hay bales, Bible brandished like a sword. "The wages of sin," he intoned, but Juliet met his gaze, calm as the river. "And the grace of God is sufficient," she replied, quoting back. He faltered, crowd murmurs turning, and Etta, visiting from beyond, shooed him with a fly-swatter laugh. "Go preach to the crows, Reverend." The moment rippled, a stone in the pond, and by winter the sermon softened, the pickets faded. Juliet's workshop opened, classes for seamstresses of all stripes, Maria facilitating readings in the back. Their life layered richer. A garden of chiles and collards, trips to the res for powwows, letters from Portland brides with photos in their gowns, notes tucked in hems. "You are enough." Yet human frailty tested them. Juliet's health wavered. A bout of pneumonia from the damp studio, landing her in the county hospital amid beeping monitors and antiseptic chill. Maria kept vigil, Rosa bringing pozole thermoses, Lila reading aloud from the chapbook. In the sterile quiet, Juliet confessed fears of failing their fragile empire, of love's weight proving too much. "What if I'm not strong enough?" she whispered for dripping slow. Maria leaned close, forehead to forehead. "You're the strongest storm I know. And I'm the shore that holds." Recovery was slow, but it mended something deeper, vulnerability voiced, dependencies owned. Juliet emerged leaner, laughing sooner, her designs bolder with motifs of anchors and wings. Spring unfurled with surprise. Maria's period late, then gone. A clinic visit confirming the impossible, or possible in this era of science and choice. They'd talked of it in whispers, IVF a distant dream, but a donor friend from the circle offered. And now, a heartbeat flickered on the ultrasound. Juliet's joy was a sunrise, hands cradling Maria's still flat belly. Our little rebel, she murmured, naming possibilities. Sage for the river, Luna for the moon. Pregnancy brought its graces and gales. Morning sick in the cottage, Maria craved Juliet's lavender tea. Afternoons they walked the river, debating nursery rhymes in Spanish and Southern drawl. Monroe rallied unexpected. Rosa knitting booties, Daniel building a crib, the writing circle gifting stories for bedtime. But shadows crept, whispers of unnatural families, a clinic protest that splashed their names in the Gazette again. The climax crested at a council meeting, budget votes looming for the community center. The preacher rallied opposition, decrying funds for agenda-driven dens. But Maria testified, belly rounding under her blouse. This center saved us, she said, voice carrying the weight of their arc. It builds bridges, not walls. For my child and yours. Juliet followed, sketches of inclusive murals in hand. Art doesn't discriminate. Why should we? The vote passed narrowly, cheers echoing, and in the parking lot the preacher approached, not with fire but fatigue. Maybe God's bigger than my book, he muttered, walking away. It was no conversion but a cracked light seeping through. Summer swelled Maria's form, the baby kicking like Morse code promises. They hosted a blessing, not church but riverside with circle kin and family, words woven from Whitman and La Virgin. As fireflies rose, Juliet knelt ear to belly. Welcome, little one. We've been waiting. In those months Maria traced their journey. From thrift store hooked to this hearth of hope. Betrayal had scarred, conflicts clashed, but each breaking birth becoming human, flawed, free. The note's words endured, not as plea but proof. Love persists, defying the divides we dare to cross. The birth came on a harvest moon, the brasses silvered and full, as if the river itself labored in sympathy. Maria's waters broke at dusk, contractions rolling like thunder, and they raced to the birthing center in Austin, Juliet white-knuckled on the wheel, Rosa chanting Ave Marias from the back. The labor stretched through the night, Maria gripping Juliet's hand, breath sinking in the dim room scented with sage and sweat. You're a warrior, Juliet whispered through each push, her face a mirror of awe and ache. At dawn Sage Elena arrived. 8 pounds of fury and wonder, dark curls matted, eyes like Maria's, cry piercing the quiet. Juliet cut the cord, tears carving paths, and they held her between them, a trinity forged in the flood. Rosa entered first, crossing herself, then cradling her granddaughter with whispers of benedictions. A miracle, she said, and Maria knew it true. Not divine intervention, but the alchemy of choice and chance. Monroe welcomed Sage with wary warmth. The Gazette ran a birth announcement, neutral, factual, but letters followed. Congrats from the circle, a quilt from Daniel's wife, even a card from the aunt in Savannah, tentative olive branches blooming. The cottage adapted. Crib in the corner, mobiles of wildflowers spinning lazy, nights of feedings and lullabies that blurred into dawn. Parenthood reshaped them, love's lens sharpening the world's edges. Sage's first smile came at 6 weeks, gummy and guileless, dissolving Juliet's exhaustion into giggles. Maria returned to teaching part-time, baby in a sling, lessons laced with tales of resilient mothers. Zora, Frida, the women who'd birthed worlds from wombs and words. Juliet's line expanded. Baby carriers with hidden pockets for pacifiers and poems, sales funding a trust for Sage's future. Challenges wove through the joy. Colic nights that frayed tempers, Juliet's freelance gigs drying up in a recession dip, Maria's body still knitting from birth's tear. Whispers persisted. Playground moms eyeing their ringless hands, the preacher's flock boycotting the workshop, but resilience rooted deeper. Lila, now engaged, co-parented a reading nook at the center. Etta's spirit lingered in donated fabrics, ghosts guiding their hands. A year on, conflict resurfaced, not from foes but within. Juliet chafed at Monroe's bounds, Portland's pull tugging like tide. We could go, she said one evening, Sage asleep on the rug, blocks scattered like fallen stars. Bigger world for her. Maria felt the old fracture the thrift store echo run or root. This is our ground, she countered, voice soft but sure. We claimed it. For Sage to know where she stands. The argument simmered, days of polite distance, until a storm broke it open. Rain lashed the cottage, power flickering, and Juliet confessed the root. Fear of failing as mother, of her blood's legacy tainting their girl. Daddy's shadow, she said, voice cracking. What if I pass it on? Maria pulled her close, rain-drumming duet. You passed the light. The one that led you back to me. Reconciliation came in action. A road trip, not escape but exploration. Driving to Oregon with Sage strapped in. Scouting a satellite studio while affirming Monroe as anchor. Portland's rains washed doubts, Riley's boutique thriving. And they returned with plans. Seasonal splits, roots and wings in balance. 2 years blurred into milestones. Sage's first steps on the riverbank. Words tumbling in Spanglish drawl. The writing circle's second chapbook, dedicated to the daughters who stayed. Rose's health steadied, her stories now circle lore. Daniel's group merged with theirs, dialogues bridging divides. The preacher retired. His successor a quiet progressive, sermons on love's manifold faces. Betrayal's ghost visited once more, in Amelia's final gambit. A lawsuit over a stolen heirloom. A locket from their grandmother. Court was swift, dismissed as pettiness, but the hurt lingered until Juliet traced its chain around her neck. It's ours now, she said, clasping it on Sage. Reclaimed. The awakening crested at Sage's 3rd birthday. A riverside gathering under string lights. Kin and circle mingling, fiddles playing soft. As cake-smeared faces and laughter rose, Maria caught Juliet's eye across the fire. The note's words unspoken but alive. I still love you. In that gaze the arc completed. From forbidden spark to this communal flame. Conflicts resolved not in triumph but tenderness. Monroe evolved slowly. Pride flags on porches, workshops for trans youth. A mural on the center wall. Women entwined, hands breaking chains. Maria and Juliet's love became legend, not scandal. The thrift store dress a relic in the museum. Note framed as testament. In quiet evenings with Sage dreaming and the river sighing, Maria would reflect on the hook that hooked them. The stumble, the slip, the words that wouldn't fade. Life's drama played on, human and humane. A story of mending what society rends. And in the end, freedom wasn't flight, but flourishing where you'd fallen loved, whole unbowed. The epilogue unfolded in fragments. Sage at 10 penning her own tales. Juliet's gowns in galleries, Maria's novel on shelves. Monroe a patchwork, scars woven into strength. The note yellowed in a drawer but its message endured. Love against all odds still does.